And welcome to this edition of Assembly Calendar. I'm your host, Matt Vischer. Our guest today is New York State Assemblyman Pete Lopez, who represents the 102nd Assembly District, basically the southern tier, Mid-Hudson, and Northern Catskills
I'm glad
section
you collected yourself. That
of
was good.
New York.
That was good.
Thank
you
you
didn't
for
put an or an ah. You took a breath and
That's
put your
right.
thoughts together. That's
you know,
good.
it's like jogging the memory
An
we haven't done a show, and it's been
a while. An old colleague of mine said to me, Pete, when you pause, just pause. Don't put an or an ah in there. So
Me being a
were
broadcasting
very good.
guy,
You did
yes. See that?
I could see the pause. You were collecting yourself.
You elected officials
you
aren't the only ones that can.
Off you went. You did great.
Use the pauses. How are things? This is our first show of the new year, 2014.
I would say dynamic. A lot going on all at once, and any number of issues, from policy issues to budgetary issues, fiscal issues in terms of the economy. So a lot going on, and the challenge, of course, is staying on top of things, staying in touch with constituents, keeping priorities in front of decision makers. And so we have our hands full, but we're working at it. And it's a privilege for me to do that. I use an acronym that I learned in my studies, MBWA, Management by Wandering Around. So I do 1,000 miles a week, I work 7 days a week, and we stay close to our community. And as I do that, it helps me have a better feel for their priorities, their issues. And so when I come to Albany, we can anticipate concerns and trends, and it allows me a grounded ability to be grounded as I talk about issues. I'm not speaking hypothetically, I'm speaking from experience working with my neighbors across the region, Mid-Hudson, Northern Catskills, Southern Tier.
The budget.
Come on, I'm picking on you. Come on.
Yes, I know you are.
Yeah. Come on. All right.
You're getting those jabs.
Yeah, that's all right. That's all right.
I'll try to get one in by the end of the show.
It was subtle.
It was subtle.
Right.
I got to give you attention.
That's okay.
I got to give you.
I can't let you just kind of zone out on me.
That's right. No, I promise not to zone out. So speaking of the budget, the hearings are now over.
Correct.
And we're entering March,
right.
And so we're really buckling down as we do in Albany. Over the next 4 weeks or so.
Right.
Where do things stand right now with the budget process?
Well, certainly, and that was part of our conversation just before we went on air. We have any number of groups coming into Albany advocating their positions. And when I think about the budget, people think about the budget, well, it's just a bunch of numbers. Well, it's not. To me, a budget is really a policy document. It's a statement of priorities that just happens to have dollar signs attached to it. So we have any number of groups coming in, from libraries to schools to healthcare professionals, to road and bridge advocates, all looking for help and support. And really, part of the challenge this year, a little different from previous years, we're at a point where the governor has signaled that we may be in a little bit better position fiscally, a little more stable financially. And so that's given people encouragement, and so they're coming to Albany realizing that, or with the expectation that we're not in a crisis mode and doing deficit reduction. So my sense is there's a little different dynamic. I think people are a little more enthused, energy-wise. Things are a little better for them, but they're also eager to see some restorations and some new funds for their programs. So a little different dynamic in that regard.
There have been some numbers thrown around, and again, keep in mind that this budget, the actual budget surplus number, would not be realized until after April 1, when the budget is passed.
Correct.
But some are saying $1.5 billion, others are saying $2 billion. Do you have a real number at this point, or is it just arbitrary?
Interestingly, when we talk about budgets, it's all forecasting. So someone is doing a little bit of crystal ball gazing. Some of it's based on dollars available, known savings that can be banked on, so to speak. The dollar amount has not yet been agreed upon, so that'll really be the next step. The governor has proposed or purported a $2 billion surplus. My understanding of that, based on conversations and reading into that, is his proposed surplus is unusually predicated on future actions, when generally a surplus is a function of, okay, what do you have now? What we have as of April 1st. My sense of his budget projection, his surplus projection, is it's predicated on actions beyond April 1st, other terms and conditions that he has proposed in his 2014-2015 budget.
I see.
So it's a little different. It's a shade of gray, but it's significant. And so the challenge will be, will the governor's recommendations be adopted whole cloth? If not, how does that affect his projections? And so the Assembly and the Senate will have to develop their own. The comptroller often weighs in with his own assessment, and will determine what is the real figure. That will then set in motion the process of deliberating on priorities. So following the number being set, agreed upon number, then each house will pass their own wish list. Really, it's a one-house budget. It's a wish list. And then come together, start to iron it out in conference committees, and work with targets that are assigned to them by leadership based on what's intended to be used with the surplus. So, all that said, that's the process. The challenge will be that the governor's $2 billion surplus he has laid claim to. So I claim thee in the name of Spain, all right? The $2 billion he suggested should be used for this experiment with local governments for consolidation shared services. It's an interesting proposal. It has many local governments on the defensive. They feel that they're being challenged or unduly pressured by his initiative. It's an experiment. But the simple measure being that the governor's claiming most, if not all, of that $2 billion purported surplus for that purpose. In the meantime, you have schools that are saying, what about gap elimination? What about, that's $1.6 billion. What about any number of
And there's been
issues?
talk to restore that gap elimination aid.
Basically gap elimination, and we'll talk a little bit about Common Core, which is related, but gap elimination was a mechanism put in place during the deficit.
I believe under the Patterson administration.
Correct. To recapture formula allocated state aid that would otherwise flow to schools. So as cutbacks were occurring across the board, this mechanism was put in place. At present, that's withholding $1.6 billion roughly, give or take $100 million here or there, from, come on, I'm working on it, come on.
I know. It's just one big pot of imaginary numbers, pretty much. So the
bottom line is on that, just with that one analogy, $2 billion of proposed surplus, $1.6 billion, almost all of that, just for one issue area. Significant issue. So the challenge will be, is the surplus real? And how do we sort this out? What is the real number? And then how do we sort this out with even recognizing that economic development, property tax relief, all those things that are also critical are on the plate at the same time.
Speaking of education, a nice segue here.
Yes.
We are discussing a plan that the New York State Assembly Republican Conference unveiled recently, known as the Apple Plan.
Right.
And this plan would address the Common Core concerns that have been facing constituents, voters around New York State. You spoke recently on the Apple Plan, so we're going to go ahead and roll that tape.
Sure.
Of some of your comments, and we'll come back and discuss further in detail with
Sounds
Assemblyman
good.
Pete Lopez.
Sounds good. I'm here with Tim Farley, who's principal at Ichabod Crane Central School in Columbia County. And we're here really continue to focus on our schools, Common Core in particular, and also the other issue that we have to make clear is that we can't let Common Core overshadow the financial needs that have been ongoing. So we need to stabilize our schools fiscally, and we need to stabilize them programmatically. So governor's office has really been nibbling around the edges. The regents, to be honest, have been more decorations. And our schools are struggling. People are suffering. So we need a lot of help. And I would ask Tim to say a couple words here on the school's behalf.
Well, if you're just talking about the school funding, Ichabod Crane is a perfect example. Over the past few years, we've closed 2 elementary buildings. We've just this current year are down $1.8 million in gap elimination. And we've laid off over 60 people over the past few years, so it's been quite devastating.
So in your opinion, professional opinion, Tim, what needs to change? So Assemblyman, coming back out of that tape, we were talking to a local superintendent, I believe, from the Ichabod Crane Central School District.
Correct.
So he's on the front lines.
He's actually the middle school principal, I believe. I had called him superintendent.
He is on the front lines of this Common Core issue, and he basically was saying it's been a mess from the onset.
Yes. That
the rollout of this plan has not been effective. So we basically have unveiled the Apple proposal, which would address some of the concerns.
And I would say, as we look at this proposal for probably the better part of a year, I would say at least since early summer, I've been focusing on Common Core issues. Prior to that, I've been focusing on education, and the budget piece certainly was in front of us for the last 5 or 6 years with the deficit. Pardon me. So in terms of Common Core, I've held numerous hearings, some that I've scheduled myself, some scheduled with other parties. In this case, we had done some with some of my colleagues to focus on the Common Core, which is a result of the race to the top federal initiative. And there were a number of elements that really were not highlighted or even visible when the Race to the Top was voted on that came out during the summer, the rollout of Common Core in particular. So for our audience, Common Core is a new set of standards that is being imposed on all schools, kindergarten through 12th grade, that dramatically changes how education, content and curriculum, how education occurs in New York State. The challenge has been, it's so alien to current or to previous programs that teachers are having to rewrite lesson plans as they go. They've added testing, all sorts of amazing amounts of testing on material that the students haven't learned. They're refusing to let students and teachers see the results of the test.
And there was a sharing of private information. That's the other issue?
Huge issue. So yes, and so for our viewers, if you can imagine allowing personal private information of our students or young people to be transmitted to third-party entities for their use for commercial purposes. So all
without
of us,
their consent.
Without their consent, unknowingly, just transmitting all that information. So there's been a tremendous outcry from the public, which I am thrilled about. And it's coming from all quarters, all walks of life, upstate, downstate, regardless of education or personal wealth. People are highly concerned and offended by this rollout. The challenge has been that the regents and the commissioner really have
Commissioner King,
Education Commissioner, have been relatively deaf to this and unflappable with their advancement of the Common Core. So that has heightened intensity, that has heightened our engagement, and my bottom line is, if the regents won't change it and the commissioner refuses, we have an obligation at the legislative level to intervene. And we're also encouraging people to focus on the governor, because when you think about it, the Race to the Top was advocated by the governor, and many people voted for it. I voted for it. But we learned that there are issues. So the governor has been very slow to acknowledge the shortcomings and has really focused on the regents and the Commissioner of Education. To be honest, the governor has tremendous power and tremendous sway with those entities. If he signaled a desire to change, they'll do it.
It sounds as if the direction now is to place a 2-year moratorium on the testing that's tied to Common Core. And a number of groups now are calling for that.
Sure.
Will it happen?
I think it will. And again, many have called for the repeal of Common Core.
The full outright appeal of it
altogether. Just remove it. Others have suggested that let's do major surgery on the issues that are of concern, the excessive testing, the inability to share test results, the release of private personal information, do major surgery and maintain some of those elements that may be salvageable and noteworthy.
The question is,
the moratorium, all it does is provide breathing room. So yes, a moratorium would be helpful, but you still have to come back to it and decide what's the path for education in years to come.
The question is, if there was an outright appeal of the curriculum altogether, would the state lose that federal money?
That's a good question, and my answer would be give it back. If it's causing such crisis in our schools, we're struggling financially, and now we're struggling programmatically. Our schools are in a spiral, a downward spiral. So many schools receive only a few $1,000s from this. Their answer is give it back. We don't want the tail wagging the dog. We want to have ownership and control of curriculum to make sure that it serves our students and that we're comfortable with it.
Assemblyman, unfortunately, we're out of time today. Always a fast 15 minutes.
It does. It goes quick.
Hopefully, we'll see you again
sometime
soon.
Sounds good. Pleasure.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for joining us. And until next time, we'll see you. Have a good one.